And that kind of leads to one answer, at least to the philosophical question you raised, like why? Why are we in this separation? Why have we descended into this illusion of our separateness and generated all of these dramas and horrors? And it seems like we're lost in separation as a society. Like the human condition is incredibly degraded right now. And that degradation is mirrored by the degradation of nature. And it's a moral degradation. It's an economic degradation. I mean, the way it's a bodily degradation. Horrifying. Why? Why did we do this? And I think that ultimately the answer has to do with the word I used, drama, that we're entering into these multitudinous dramas. Every possible story you can imagine has happened on this earth. In order to experience that, in order for consciousness to know itself through these diverse situations and stories, so that eventually, as we come back together, we are enriched by the journey. And like God knows God through the fracturing of God's self into these trillions and trillions of pieces, and what's going to happen. And part of the story is that at a certain phase of it, it seems like we'll never get back to oneness. We'll never return to God. That dark night of the soul is a key part of the experience. And so, yeah, I'm getting really like theological here, but we could make it practical, but maybe I'll pass it back to you for the moment.
Well, listen, I mean, the one thing you said before was about the conditioning. Like you look at the most vile person that you despise publicly and what they're doing, and you're like, I would never do anything like that. But you are so right, based on that person's life conditions, how they came in, because I still believe we do all come in a pure state. Yet there is, and if you want to get a little bit more spiritual aspect, there are probably karmic things and other things that come in. I always, because I have kids, I go, oh, well, she was programmed like that at the factory. Like, I have no idea how we didn't teach her that. We didn't teach him that. Like, there is a programming that comes in, but that one of those programs isn't hate and it isn't separation. That is taught. And that programming, as like Bruce Lipton says, the first 7 years, is so crucial because you pick up everything and you're pretty much programmed for life. You spend the first 7 years programming yourself, and then the rest of your life trying to deprogram yourself to go back to where you came from at the beginning. So I look at when I see people who are doing things, and this is on a deeper spiritual level, things that I wouldn't agree upon. You know, someone cuts me off in traffic or something, like, what is happening to them? Or if they're yelling and screaming or they're doing something, like, what is happening? What has happened to them to get to that point? You read the news, you see the news, and you see something vile. I'm like, what did it take for that human being to get to that point? They convinced themselves that that's what they needed to do at that moment in time. So I look at it a little bit differently in regards to the programming. And I think if most of us started to look at things a little bit more wider in awareness, I think things might start changing a little bit. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, or another way to put it is that the way that our parents raised us, like their good or bad parenting, is only a very tiny part of the programming.
Agreed.
You know, like in utero and in childhood, we're absorbing the zeitgeist. We're absorbing the attitudes of the whole culture. We're absorbing the stories and mythologies that culture holds about what is real and what it is to be human. We are epigenetically like processing the trauma of past generations. We are repositories for all kinds of trauma and atrocities that happened all over the world that influence our incarnation. You could look at that through a past life lens, or simply like these events are in the field. And you could even say that on a soul level, we choose to be born into this difficulty into this trauma, into this pain, in order that we may heal it.
Right.
So, which is kind of contrary to the normal idea of karma, that people who have really shitty circumstances are being punished for past life malfeasance. But it's actually, it could be kind of the opposite, that people who are in really bad circumstances volunteered for a big mission to walk that journey and come back, or at least come partway back to source. Someone's like, oh, like someone has to volunteer to be that abused kid to, get cancer when you're 3 years old. Yeah. When the more I realize this on a deeper than intellectual level, the less of an effort it takes to stand in non-judgment.
Well, let me ask
I have a friend who, his brother is just a real asshole, like violent, abusive, narcissistic, just like a real jerk, Mm-hmm. And my friend is very angry at his brother. But, when we explored, like, what is going on? I mean, his just like all this anger, but we explored, some of his early childhood memories when they were abused by their babysitter, and his little brother, 3 years old, like getting like taken into a room and Lord knows what was done to him, And then it's like, wow, you really can't blame the poor guy for what he became when, a 3-year-old,
Sure,
and then
sure.
being told, if you tell your parents, I'll kill your parents.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A 3-year-old is going to believe that.
The trauma, sure.
Yeah.
The anger.
So and then you want to shift the anger to that babysitter who abused him. But what's that guy's story? Turns out that like 2 of his brothers committed suicide. Who knows? Like his father was an alcoholic. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So do you blame the father?
And it just keeps going.
And it keeps going. And eventually you run out of people to blame. Or blame no longer becomes the best strategy to try to change this. Because really that's what we want. It might feel gratifying to punish the wicked. But I like to ask, if you could, if what it takes for this never to happen again is that the wicked get off scot-free, the perpetrators, the Illuminati, the power elite, the human trafficking Satanists, et cetera, whatever you hold in your worldview, if they get away with it, but it never happens again, are you willing to pay that price? Are you willing to pay the price if you're never vindicated? Of you're never celebrated as having been right all along?
Mm.
Are you willing to pay that price? What are you willing to lay on the altar of healing? Because it's going to take a lot. Because as I said, we are deep, deep in it. We're deep in the pit of hell.
But that's ego, though.
Yeah.
That's absolute ego. When you just said it very so clearly, like, if they can get away with it and you are guaranteed it will never happen again, can you let it go? Ego won't let it go because you've been wronged. But if you're able to transcend ego a bit and forgive, that's where, Jesus and all the spirits, forgiveness is so powerful. Empathy, forgiveness, these much more powerful than vengeance, because it's a lot harder to forgive than it is to get revenge and vengeance on someone, because it feels good for the moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's an instant moment, but afterwards, then you probably feel guilty about the vengeance, or you have to deal with that weight. Where in forgiveness, it's harder, but then you're good. It's kind of like a cleansing almost. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you get vengeance, this is what we talked about at the beginning. The origin of this social pattern. Like somebody gets vengeance and they feel good, and everyone connected with them thinks that was great, but then the guy that he killed in vengeance, what do his brothers think? And his children and his wife and her brother-in-law, and like they want to get vengeance back, and they do, and then they feel good, and it goes back and forth.
Right. Or you could forgive and stop, and it stops.
Right. And what does it take to forgive? And this is the link back to non-judgment, which comes from understanding what it's like to be somebody else. And when you hear that story, oh, like this guy was abused too. He was once upon a time a cute little sweetums, an innocent baby. He wasn't born bad.
Right.
And then he went through this, that, and the other thing. And he became like, once you know the full story, it's not actually hard to forgive. It's actually almost unstoppable. If you have to make an effort to forgive, usually that means that you're missing some information.
It's very true. It's very true, because you're right. Every monster that's ever walked the planet came in as an innocent baby. Throughout history, any atrocities that were done throughout history.
And then at this point, people talk about psychopaths and so forth, and there's exceptions to that. But I think, to account for that, we can take it to the level of karma and epigenetics. But yeah, as a general rule,
they're babies.
Yeah.
They're just, when they first come out, they generally aren't psychopaths at 1 month old, generally speaking. Something might occur in their systems, in their brains, in the programming, but generally speaking, and if you could understand that, it starts to clarify things a little bit. But sometimes the anger is so strong and the wanting for vengeance is so strong, it clouds completely.
And the anger is okay. Like, I'm not you
can be angry, obviously.
Yeah. But what happens, like, anger is a powerful energy for transformation. It says, no, not anymore. No. But when it is channeled onto hate, onto blaming someone or something that isn't the real cause of the problem, the anger is neutralized. The transformative power of the anger is neutralized because it's not actually going towards the source of the problem anymore.
Right.
It's like, it's like in the Middle Ages when the Black Plague came and murderous mobs went around killing the Jews, blaming them for poisoning the wells and making everybody sick.
Right.
And they were like, yes, we've done something about this. We've got revenge, But did it help solve the plague? Not in the slightest. So this is a classic example of anger diverted onto hate. Fear diverted onto hate.
Let me ask you this, because obviously you have an intellectual mind, and you think a lot about things, but yet you also have a spiritual side. How do you balance these two energies? Because the intellectual is a different energy than the spiritual, and how do you kind of balance? How do you balance that?
It's not a matter of balance. It's about understanding the role and utility of the intellect. It's as the intellect is a way to gather certain kinds of information that then feed into the body, into the heart, and inform the heart's choices. The intellect is also a way to play. It can accomplish certain tasks. It's useful for certain things. So for me, it's about recognizing what it is and is not useful for. Like, for example, if I'm trying to make a choice about love,
right,
and who to spend my time with, it's not going to do much good to add up the costs and benefits.
No, it's not, sir. Not at all.
Not a good way. Like, you can try to choose that way, but it won't. For one thing, you'll always regret your choices because you can never add it all up, and you will also be indecisive. You'll never be certain. You'll never be confident in your choices. So that's like a classic misapplication of what we're calling intellect.
Yeah, because love is unquantifiable. So it's completely unquantifiable. So if you try to add intellect into a power like love or a feeling like love, there have people like plus side, negative sides. Should I love this person? Should I marry this person? That kind of thing. And you can't quantify it, no matter how intellectual you might be.
Right.
But has there ever been a point, though, that your intellect has has become a hindrance in your spiritual understanding, because some of the concepts in spirituality do not jive with intellectual reasoning, materialism versus quantum physics, if you will, those kind of things. Like they're two very separate things, but you seem to balance them, and you seem to work. I said that you use the word balance, but you seem to play with them equally.
Well, it's that. So maybe we'll talk about reason rather than intellect.
Okay.
The places that reason will take you depend on your starting point. Mm-hmm. Depends on what you take for granted, what you assume. So a lot of what we know through our spiritual faculties does seem to contradict what reason tells us. Mm-hmm. But that's because reason is based on the idea of a separate self in an objective universe, mm-hmm. in which change happens when a force is exerted on a mass. So it seems irrational to expect synchronicities to happen when you let go of control. That seems irrational. It seems irrational to expect that a change will happen in a distant part of the world because of that your personal choices have any effect on what happens globally.
Right.
But that's because of the foundational assumptions of our reason, which are separation. So suppose you say, suppose you have different assumptions. For example, you have the assumption of interbeing, that I'm intimately connected to all that is. Therefore, anything that happens within will be mirrored by something that happens without. Therefore, the intelligence of myself is mirrored by the intelligence of the world and of all things. So, of course, there's going to be synchronicities when I'm not imposing my own order on the external world. So this is like a different foundation of reasoning. Mm-hmm. It could be as simple as I'm not separate, we're not separate from nature, therefore the well-being of the soil will be our own well-being.
Right.
And I don't know how, maybe I don't know the chemistry or the biology, but as a basic principle of interbeing, what I do unto thee, I do unto myself. And that's actually the esoteric interpretation of the golden rule.
Right.
It's not a rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is, as you do unto others, so you are doing to yourself. So if we take those as foundational assumptions, then reason will be aligned with spiritual understanding. It will not be in conflict with it.
But it all depends on the foundation that you're talking about. So like indigenous people, like you were saying, have a much more connected to nature. And they look at Western society with oddity. Like I forgot who I was in